We were gathered in this sanctuary almost 5 years ago on a Shabbat morning, celebrating one of the many young smiling faces of Bethel becoming B'nai Mitzvah. And in the midst of the bar mitzvah boy chanting Haftorah, Terry Pridgeon, our maintenance coordinator, ascended the bima. If you come on Shabbat, you know that the only time he comes onto the bima, there's a problem with the air conditioning. I assumed there was a facility issue. He let me know that the doors that are normally propped open on Shabbat morning, a literal and metaphoric symbol of the welcoming community we hoped to create and build, were now closed and locked after he heard reports that an active shooter had opened fire at the Tree of Life Synagogue that morning in the Squirrel Hill neighborhood of Pittsburgh. That was the first time in my tenure here as rabbi that our doors were locked on Shabbat morning. And since that moment, October 27th, 2018, the deadliest attack on the Jewish community in American history, our doors have never been unlocked here again, even adding security professionals at our entrance. I think for many of us, the Tree of Life shooting reignited our fears of rising anti-Semitism, changed our perceptions of how to create a welcoming community, and redefine what it meant to live as an engaged Jew in America. I remember watching the news that evening as newscasters focused on the life stories of the 11 victims and humanized them so that they were more than just a name, more than a statistic. Like Irving Younger, who was the first person to greet you with a Shabbat Shalom and a handshake when you entered the sanctuary and would help you find a seat. And Mel Wax, who prided himself on being there early for Pesukei de Zimra and would park several streets away so that those who needed it could park closer to the building. Or Bernice and Sylvan Simon, who were killed in the same building that they were married 60 years prior. Or Jerry Rabinowitz, who was not seen in the basement sanctuary of the Dor Chadash minyan, but in the lobby because he was a doctor and ran towards the gunshots. Or Richard Gottfried and Daniel Stein, who were cornered and shot in a basement kitchen while they were preparing for the Kiddush that would follow services. Or David and Cecil Rosenthal, two brothers who were adults with special needs who prided themselves on being greeters as you walked into the entrance of the building and always made sure that the prayer books were organized and lined up perfectly. As greeters, they were the first to welcome violent terrorist Robert Bowers in the building before he began shooting. I sat in my living room just a couple of weeks ago, the middle of the summer, with cable news on in the background as it was reported that Bowers was formally sentenced to death, forgetting sometimes that our children are always listening and hear and understand more than we think. I exhaled an elated and very loud, "Good!" That's when my 9-year-old son Noah, playing cards on the other side of the room, became wide-eyed with confusion and asked me, "Abba, why are you so happy that someone's going to die?" I didn't know what to say or how to respond. My first thought was, well, the world will be better off with one less violent bigot on this earth. He deserves to die a painful, violent death, an eye for an eye, for the violence he has caused. But I didn't say that to a 9-year-old. Instead, we sat together and I explained that it's not up to us who shall live and who shall die. That's in God's hands. And while we have a legal system, there's only one judge enthroned on high. We don't get to choose. And we don't and can't celebrate the death of anyone, not even modern-day Amalek. We first encounter the Amalekites in the book of Exodus as they battle the Israelites in the wilderness. But at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, we hear in greater detail that Amalek preyed on the most vulnerable, snuck up on Bnei Israel, attacked the young children, nursing mothers, elderly tribal leaders. And so we are commanded, remember what Amalek did to you on that journey. And therefore, blot out the memory of Amalek and do not forget it. We're told to blot out the memory of Amalek, essentially to rid this world of them and their descendants. And that continues throughout Jewish history as tradition attributes some of our most villainous adversaries, from Haman to Hitler, as descendants of Amalek. A biblical command to blot out an entire people. And we're even told elsewhere that ayin tachat ayin, an eye for an eye, is how we respond. This idea of retribution makes rabbinic tradition so uncomfortable that the Mishnah reinterprets eye for an eye to actually mean financial restitution for any loss. For although capital punishment is a clear biblical command, gruesomely, via strangulation and stoning, burning, and decapitation, the death penalty in the Torah is mentioned from everything from an intense consequence of murder to the almost comical consequence of being a rebellious teenager. Rabbinic tradition is so uncomfortable with deciding who shall live and who shall die, something that our liturgy states tonight is only reserved for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Talmud establishes barriers with regards to witness accounts and testimonies, and the Mishnah clarifies that while a Beit Din, a rabbinic court of 3, can decide most legal decisions, for capital punishments, the death penalty, it must be decided by a Sanhedrin of 23. And Mishnah Sanhedrin notes that a court that puts even one person to death every 7 years is tyrannical. Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah suggests that even a court that sentences one person to death every 70 years should be seen as destructive. Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon go as far as to say that had they been in the Sanhedrin, no one would ever be put to death. Modern debate over the death penalty focuses on the imperfections of our legal system and whether or not we'd be putting innocent individuals to death incorrectly or unfairly tried for crimes they did not commit. Hesitation among many Jewish leaders to support capital punishment was certainly based on a fear of being responsible for killing someone who was innocent, having blood on our hands, especially when history reminds us that we have been those victims, when angry mobs have taken justice into their own hands. But that's not what we're dealing with here. This is Amalek, right? A terrorist whose bigotry, rooted in anti-Semitism, led to the murder of 11 Jews praying together on Shabbat simply because they were Jewish and celebrated their Judaism. There were witnesses, and while the murderer did not plead guilty, there were manifestos found online on the far right corners of the dark web prior to the mass shooting that were an admission of guilt. For all the guardrails and roadblocks that the Talmudic rabbis put into place to ensure that an innocent victim wouldn't be put to death, that doesn't apply here. This man is evil and guilty, and putting him to death will mean there's less evil in this world. But then why have I been so uncomfortable with it since my 9-year-old asked me that question? My colleague, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky, whose 2013 response on participating in the American death penalty was adopted as policy and halakhic perspective by the conservative movements, he clarifies that we require din and rachamim, justice and mercy. Both are needed. We can't only have mercy. And Dr. Beth Berkowitz, professor of Jewish studies at Barnard College, acknowledges that while the Talmud goes to great lengths to prevent following through on the death penalty, it also acknowledges that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel pushed back on Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon when they said that their Sanhedrin would never execute anybody, claiming that these rabbis would multiply murderers in Israel. Meaning, to put it bluntly, Shimon ben Gamliel believed you had to kill people to stop them from killing people. But in the end, Dr. Berkowitz didn't cite a Talmudic reference. She chose to teach the words of Coretta Scott King, who said, morality is never upheld by a legalized murder. Why do I feel so uncomfortable about this? Why did I know how to respond to my son? Why was I ashamed when he asked me? I didn't want my son to think that I supported the killing of anyone, because I don't. Maybe in the heat of the moment, I thought justice was served, but I can't choose who dies. Only God does that. According to a 2014 poll of the Public Religion Research Institute, only 1/3 of American Jews even support the death penalty at all, substantially lower than any other faith in this country. Many family members of Tree of Life victims supported the jury's recommendation for the death penalty. But Miri Rabinowitz, the widow of the slain Dr. Jerry Rabinowitz, spoke about a bit of bitter irony, as her husband had devoted his entire career to the sanctity of life. Rabbi Jonathan Perlman serves as rabbi of Dor Chadash congregation, one of 3 congregations that met in the Tree of Life building. He, along with 3 others, hid in an electrical closet in the basement that fateful morning before escaping through a back staircase. He experienced that and said, even in this case, he believed our faith opposes the death penalty. And I don't know what to say to my 9-year-olds. I know this, that the Israelites, when they journeyed through the miraculous split sea of reeds, they continued to be pursued by the tyrannical Pharaoh and his army of taskmasters who conformed to his hateful policies. When the Israelites successfully crossed that split sea from slavery to freedom, the waters returned, and Egyptian soldiers on chariots were submerged, drowning in the process. Within the pages of the Babylonian Talmud, the rabbis asked if God rejoices in the death of those who are evil. And Tractate Megillah recounts a midrash of God's ministering angels who were singing songs of celebration as they watched the Egyptian soldiers drowning and gasping for air. God challenged back. Someone is dying and you are celebrating? With this, they conclude that not even the most evil deaths should we celebrate. On this Yom HaKippurim, this Day of Atonement, this day of judgment. We grovel before God and acknowledge that it is ultimately God who decides who shall live and who shall die, God who writes and seals us in the book of life for years to come. We prostrate before the judge on high as we ritually prepare for our own spiritual deaths. We understand that issues of life and death are out of our hands. We understand that life is fragile, that life is short. That life is too precious for us, mere imperfect beings, to decide who lives another day. As I tucked my son in that night, I tried to explain that I misspoke, that I'm not happy if anyone dies. I'm just sad. I'm sad that we live in a world full of violence, a world in which someone killed a sanctuary full of worshipers because they were Jewish. I'm sad that we live in a world where we need security in order to attend Yom Kippur services. I'm sad because I know that the death penalty may bring about so-called justice, but not healing. I'm sad because nothing can bring back the 11 murdered victims of the Tree of Life shooting. And I'm sad that the idea of being joyful that someone will die even crossed my mind, that my child hurt. I'm sad that I had to have this conversation with my son, that instead of living with the ignorant bliss of childhood, he's aware of the hate and discrimination in this world, maybe more fearful because of it. Like all parents, I wish I had the answers for my children, but I don't. And I wish there was a simple and clear-cut understanding of this issue, but there isn't. Even our tradition doesn't really give us one. Maybe the truth is, in most situations, it doesn't. Maybe that's okay. And that's the ultimate answer. That we're supposed to sit in our discomfort. And maybe on this evening at the beginning of Yom Kippur, it's appropriate to begin by acknowledging that discomfort. Because I do know that the moment we become comfortable with the death penalty, even when we feel like the situation is warranted, we failed as humanity. My own struggle with giving an answer to my son is because there's not a clear one. I don't want someone who's murdered so many Jews because they were Jewish to walk this earth. And I refuse to accept the reality where others want to kill us because of who we are. But I also don't want to live in a world where we decide who shall live and who shall die. For as Coretta Scott King said, morality is never upheld for legalized murder. Or to paraphrase Brian Stevenson, the question isn't whether some people deserve to die for the crimes they've committed. The real question is whether we deserve to kill. Today, we focus on the possibility of death. We worry if we'll be sealed in the book of life this year. But every other day we focus on life, l'chaim, and the celebration of that life. We began this evening saying Shechianu for every milestone and moment, thanking God for allowing us to be here. So even tonight, as we await our spiritual fates to be sealed, let us not focus on being the judge of someone else. Let us leave that to God. Gemar Chatima Tova. May we be sealed in the book of life. Amen.